Now I got another Star Wars property. This one's from Expanded Universe. So, for people that might not know, when the original Star Wars movie came out in 1977, ever since then they've been putting out comic books and other media, video games, all kinds of stuff, and it was all considered Star Wars: The Expanded Universe. Because for a long time, from 1983 when Return of the Jedi came out till 1999 when Phantom Menace came out, there was no Star Wars movies. There was some shows in the 80s. Yeah, I'm not really a big fan of those, but each to their own. And they've been putting out these books and comic book stories. And when Disney took it over, they decided all that expanded universe stuff that's been released over the last 40 years, all that stuff is now legends. It's non-canonical. It doesn't count towards the Star Wars story. So if there was a story about, one of the famous ones was Shadows of the Empire, that takes place at the same time as Empire Strikes Back and goes into, I think it might go into just before Return of the Jedi, but just and after Empire Strikes Back. So are things that are happening. So while the rebels are escaping from Hoth, there's a story about this other rebel, and he's doing this at the same time, and he doesn't go with them. Instead, he ends up fighting with IG-88 and chasing after Boba Fett. But all that stuff, according to Disney, that never happened. So the legend stuff was going on for years until whenever Disney took it over. So there's lots of old stuff there that they can draw from. And one of these ones is, I got this book a while back, is Star Wars Darth Plagueis, which is by James Luceno. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. When did this book come out? I think it was published in 2012. It says copyright 2012, but also it has another 2014. So it came out around that time. It's non-canonical now. What this book is about, if you remember Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, there's a great scene where young Anakin goes to the opera to see the Supreme Chancellor there, Palpatine, and he tells him the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise. And if you watch that scene, it's pretty heavily implied that it was his master and that he killed him, because that's what the Sith do. There's the rule of two, and there's only two Sith, a master and an apprentice. It's been that way for a millennia, and that's how they remain hidden from the Jedi, because when there were thousands of them, they were all at war with the Jedi and with each other and other Force users. But this is some deep cuts Star Wars fans here. So I read this because it's all about Palpatine, who becomes the Emperor, and then his master Darth Plagueis. I mean, even if I spoil it canonical, it's not canonical, so it was an interesting read. It's not as much about Darth Plagueis as I thought it would be. The book starts off, I mentioned this before on a previous episode, the prologue is simply it's Sidious killing Plagueis. That's the prologue before the book begins. And then the first chapter is Plagueis killing his master, Darth Tyrannibus. Probably butchering that too, which is no longer canonical. So there's a lot of Sith killing here. Now they do come back to at the end of the book, Palpatine killing, who's Sidious, Darth Sidious, killing Darth Plagueis. It does mention Monument Plaza and the mountaintop there that we saw recently in Mandalorian. I think it was episode 3 of season 3, the current season. It does mention Umate and Monument Plaza, so that's something that they carried over from Expanded Universe into the current canon of Star Wars shows and movies that they're making. So they do carry some things into it. You get, he's on the back there, you get Darth Maul as well in there, so he's actually trained by Sidious with the approval of Plagueis, so I guess there's 3 now. But at the same time, Plagueis might be courting someone else. So these Sith don't even obey their own rules. They're just whatever is best for me at the time, and if it doesn't work out later, they just sacrifice them because these people mean nothing to them. One of the interesting things that I learned from reading all this Star Wars lore, for anyone who's not a big Star Wars fan, I can't get enough of it, and that's why I keep reading all this stuff, is the Jedi and the Sith are very different ideologies about how they use the Force, and this is their religion, right? So the two different religions, where the Jedi, they go on, after they die, they go on, and their souls, the Force, goes to the ether, and then they can come back from that ether as blue Force ghosts, but not all of them can. And even during some of the movies, the Jedi didn't even know about that. We saw how they learned it. It was Master Yoda who learned it. And we saw that in Clone Wars season 6, I want to say. That was when they were wrapping it up, when they got canceled before it got brought back for next season, for the season 7 a couple years back. So the Jedi are all about that, and they can live on through the Force. Whereas the Sith, for them, once they die, they're dead. There's nothing for them. So they're all about extending their life as long as possible. So that's why it's like Palpatine has to clone himself and put his consciousness in these clone bodies. I guess that movie didn't make much sense for me. And so that's why they're all about cheating death, and that also explains why, I mean, Darth Maul was killed at the end of Phantom Menace, but they brought him back in Clone Wars, even though he was cut in half. Well, the rest of them, apparently his species can survive that, he just doesn't have any legs, so they gave him robotic legs. And we saw a lot of him in Clone Wars and in Rebels. Yeah, that stuff was great. The animation is really where it's at. So the Sith are all about cheating death. Even Anakin, Darth Vader there, he got all his limbs chopped off and left for dead, burned alive, which, that's a pretty rough way to go. But instead, no, he gets brought back, so he's cheating death, and now he has to live in the suit, which is not comfortable for him. And the rest of the time, he's just floating in a Bacta tank on, what's the name of that planet? Mustafar. Yeah, that's the lava planet that's really strong in the dark side of the Force. Anyway, getting back to this book, Darth Plagueis the Wise. It was an interesting read. I read it because I'm really interested. It didn't really have what I was looking for, but wasn't super action-packed. It was all about him finding Sidious and then training him, and then they move up their plans. And was interesting, the last few chapters take place during the Phantom Menace. As those events are going on, it's showing you other scenes that happened at the same time. And it talks about the lead up to the blockade of the Trade Federation, blockading Naboo, because we all love that, and the Trade Federation, and how they're allied with Sidious and Maul. Whew. So there's more explanation if you want more on that. But really, I give it a best book ever. I enjoyed it. I might go back and read it sometime. But now I'm working on, I don't have it here in front of me, I'm working on Star Wars Dooku Jedi Lost, which is another one of the High Republic series. This one's a bit weird, I find, because it's not a novel. It's written as a play, and it's set in 5 parts of a play, so it's like I'm reading a Shakespeare play, except it's not written in Shakespearean. It's interesting, I'll give it that. I don't know why Cavan Scott? I don't know why the writer decided to make it as a play. He did dedicate the book to Christopher Lee, which I thought was a nice touch. It's right at the beginning of the book. Have you read Darth Plagueis the Wise? If you have, let me know your thoughts on it. If you've read any of the other expanded universe legends or any of the new canonical books, let us know, and which ones you enjoyed and which ones you didn't, Then it'll help me pick different books, because right now I'm just kind of picking them at random, whatever sounds good. And they keep coming out with more books, as we're hearing from Star Wars Celebration right now. So I'm going to sign off now and move on to the next segment.